Oh, welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I'm Nerder Doug, and tonight I am hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Steve, what's going on, man?
Good, I didn't even know we were starting soon.
Surprise!
Anything to say?
8 o'clock every time, unless we're
Yeah,
running
but
late.
yeah,
So
this is
tonight we're talking
mid-sem.
about temples.
Yeah, pretty broad topic. If you look in the official, I mean, there's just ridiculous amounts of temples, all up and down in D&D of all different kinds. It's pretty interesting, and our own experiences.
Yeah, you know what? I picked temples just because I like it because it's a place, right? And
Mm-hmm.
In the D&D or even other RPGs, it can be looked as in different ways, and it gets used in
Mm-hmm.
tons of different ways, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a place where you're going to adventure. Sometimes it's a place where you're going to go and interact socially. If you're an acolyte, you have the acolyte background. Could be a place where you just they give you a room to stay in for free for the night or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you just went through like half my list of bullet points I was going to expand on in like
Yeah.
30 seconds. But yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of dials to it, is kind of what
Yeah.
I concluded as well. And just that same thing of just thinking like, well, I mean, they can be really old ancient temples that are like, there's information about like a world that hasn't existed for a long time, all the way up to like they just built this temple, or somebody just cast a spell 5 minutes ago and it appeared out of thin air now, thanks to what is that spell called? Temple of the Gods.
Yeah, yeah.
Where it takes like an hour, it's just like, boom, there it is.
So, they're also very important in in the fantasy settings. I feel like because there are so many
Absolutely.
different gods, so there's so many different ways to have a temple, and what a temple means to one religion could be completely different from another.
Yeah, right. And that's another dial to turn, just like where it's at on the, I mean, if you want to use alignment or just, it's relationship to the player characters. Like, is it a safe place? Is it a dangerous place? Is it a
Yeah.
place where like evil is worshipped or good? Or is it small or big? I mean, it could be like a little forest temple, could just be like a stone altar in a glade and maybe some accoutrements, all the way up to like, even in our Shimmer module series, like the premise, I mean, it doesn't really get into it, but like is that they're building like this enormous cathedral in the region, and it's kind of like disrupting, the activities of the people that are living around there,
Yeah, it's the
basically.
central location to to those adventures.
Mm.
Uh,
And in that, I mean, the art on the book would suggest that it's like, like Vatican sized. I mean, it ain't just no little
yeah,
temple, which, and that's just assuming humanoid temples, right? I mean, what about
yeah,
like a temple that giants built would be humongous, especially if it was like a cathedral scale of like giants.
yeah.
It would be like touching, it would be like a skyscraper, probably. I mean, close,
Like giants, or what about dragons? Like if you, especially if
right?
your world had previous ages, right? And it's a pretty common trope for fantasy and D&D is like the many ages,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah,
throughout the history of the
absolutely.
world.
Sure.
So different.
Got to add that stuff to explore.
Yeah, when different races were in prominence, and if one of them were, like you said, the giants, titans, or even dragons, right? Did they have gods? Did they worship at a temple? What does a temple made for dragons to come and worship at look like?
Yeah, really, I'm not super familiar. I know the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, like the two modules that original 5e D&D ones, culminates in like a temple of Tiamat. And I think it's sort of like a hidden underground thing, but, maybe they had constructed those dragon cults. But yeah, I'm thinking of what you're saying. It's like, if it was a temple built by dragons to like revere their gods long time ago, it would be like a massive structure, like right out in the open, and like maybe you couldn't even get into it except by flying and stuff. There wouldn't be like why would they need a door on the ground floor? So I mean, it could be a huge edifice, and it would be very large if dragons were in it, like
Yeah,
moving
well, hear
around.
me out, right? Like, what if, what if, yeah, and also, like, what if it doesn't like conform to what we consider a temple, right? The main altar is on this large mesa, and all around it is like ring of mountains that the dragons
Yeah,
actually use to perch on, and they worship from, and maybe it's all carved and fancy, right? Like, It's all the side is carved to like places where a dragon would find comfortable to kind of like perch or sit, while while whoever kind of like leads a service is down on the mesa.
Yeah, really. I mean, one of the funnest things to kind of like play around with in D&D is like the size and scale of things. I think comes up a lot in these discussions because, like, where you were describing, I mean, imagine like Ring of Mountains, like you said, there's a mesa in the center. It would be like a massive trek for like people on foot to get there and stuff. Dragons could be perched all around like miles and leagues apart on different peaks. They could still see. Maybe not clearly, but you could see other big things moving around in a mesa, and they could get there or move around very quickly. So, I mean, that would, if people are looking for like high level challenges, just something like that, where it's like, maybe, at the base level, it's like there's a bunch of dragons to fight, but they're like miles apart, and you have to like stop them at around the same time, like that standard kind of ritual thing going on, except it's not in a room, it's in like, a 10-mile radius area that you have to do it in like the next 5 minutes.
Well, what would might be fun about that, or funny as well, is the idea that like, the party has something to say and they have to get to the center of this altar to where they are, and maybe the dragons just don't even interfere because they're just curious or interested to see if they can even meet it, or they just don't think that. They find them inconsequential, right? Yeah. And like
look, if I flew down from my perch every time I saw a little humanoid trekking over the mountains, like I'd never get any sleep.
I'd never get anything done.
Yeah, it's like they're never gonna get there. Like they could be like, pastimes, like, we like to just watch, see how long they survive. But I mean, temple, it's just it's kind of like shorthand, right? Like you use the word temple, it's like immediately like doing a lot of work for you. It's like it probably is some faith-based or something ritualistic is going to happen there. It's obviously like an important place, to whoever built it. Also just means there might be treasure, or it's probably telling players like something is interesting about this place. It's a temple.
So double underscore, did the Vargarians have a temple? So when I created the Vargarians, I kind of made them. They were like our world's version of the Borg, made with magic instead of technology. So I imagine part of their ethos was that one of the things that creates conflict amongst the different people is the fact that they're different. So what the Vargarians try to do is, by absorbing them into their hive mind collective, was to make everyone the same and reduce those differences by as much as possible. So I think they would snuff out religion, and they would see religion as being a bad thing altogether, so there would be no temples. I don't know. Would that make them atheist or agnostic? I always
That's interesting. Well, I guess neither, because they would logically know there are like divine entities.
Well, I thought atheist is you don't believe in anything, and agnostic is you don't care.
I think agnostic is like you just think like there could be, like you're open to, it's like, sure, I guess that's possible, but I don't see any evidence of it, or
So
I don't know. I'm not 100% sure.
So that being said, the thing that they would do is they would try and extinguish temples and religions and that
makes
concept.
Sense.
Now, in my Under the Dome game, there's people that are rediscovering the lost Vargarian technology and civilization and magic, and they are almost taking it on like a spiritual path or religious.
That's interesting
to it, which runs kind of the counterintuitive to what they were.
Yeah, that's an interesting sort of like narrative arc for your villains, basically, across a few campaigns now. Maybe you can get so much in. Well, yeah, I guess the same players, so they probably pick up on that to some extent as well.
So my brother Ryan is the one that pitched the idea that there's two different groups of transhumanists that existed under the dome. One of them being those that are body modders with the Arcana tech, and they follow kind of they're always looking for lost tech from Vargarians, the more fanatical of that sect. And then there's bioessentialists who are like augmenting their biology. They're basically biohacking, but on a biological level, not by changing out the parts, but I don't know, like mutating, I guess. And,
Sure.
And actually, Ted's character is a product of that in the game because he's playing.
Oh yeah, he's playing like a simic hybrid. I mean,
yeah,
that's for the groundwork. Chris Hasnick asks, is a barbershop a temple for beardomancy or an unholy site? I would say it could be either, depending on your style of beardomancy. There is a free encounter on the website called, I forget how to find it, but if you look for beardomancy, you'll sure come. I mean, there's a lot, but if you scroll down, you'll probably find it. Where there is like a mystery involved, and it's like you do have to do some sort of a bit of like follicle detective work that leads you back to... What
is the cleric domain for beardomancy?
Maybe beauty or style or something like that.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I wasn't as hands-on with the beardomancy stuff.
Yeah. That one, I don't remember the cleric per se, but
I know we have at least one subclass for each of the classes.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Except for Artificer, which we cannot make.
But you can you track you can trail somebody back to a barbershop that leads to a pretty fiendish encounter. I would say actually it's pretty grisly, pretty deadly.
Is that one of the articles?
Yeah. I can't remember what it's called, but like I said, search up beardomancy. So yeah, I mean, I suppose it would just depend on how you look at beardomancy. I mean, there's a lot of spells that deal with like clippings and stuff too. So it'd be kind of fun, like with material components, or like you can, like learn stuff about people by casting spells on their hair and clippings and things, track them.
So I guess one of the things I was kind of thinking about too with this topic is, how many of the temples would actually not even look like temples, right? Like,
what do you mean? I'm curious.
Like a very martial or war god, it may actually just look like a martial academy, or a god of magic and sorcery. It may look like a mage college if you have those in your worlds, or or if it's a god of knowledge, it might just literally appear to be like a college, right?
Yeah. I find that stuff really fascinating, like in games and stuff, just because like we were just saying, like gods are real and everything, and just like how much you want to go, like, a temple to like a war god could totally just look like a regular temple with like, there's just like, like censers and, incense and robe people. But it totally would at least have the accoutrements of war. I mean, it's a war god, so it's like, it's cool. It's fun. It's just cool. It's a cool way to like, just show off your world and like make things seem interesting and play around. I don't know. I always have fun, like as a DM, like, playing around with that stuff, and as a player too, like coming up with gods and what their things are like, their temples.
Well, I mean,
and I like the idea of, it's a kind of Greek, and you guys have sort of got into it in your own games of just like, well, I mean, there is gods for all these other things. So it's like going on a sea voyage, like maybe you visit the temple of a sea god just to like leave an offering or something. I think Theros is like that a lot, really leans in. There's a lot of temples in Theros, I'd imagine, to all those gods. And that's kind of cool, right? It's like, here's a good question for us. Are temples always related to the gods and worship? I guess, traditionally they are, but I'm trying to think of like, is there other kinds of temples? People say my body is a temple. So I guess it's...
the only context I think of when I think of temples is in a religious one.
Right.
But also you could have some fun with it too, in the sense that like, what race just kind of makes up gods? It's a fish.
The Kuotoa.
Kuotoa. That's it. Like, they could have generations that have built and dedicated a temple to something that doesn't actually exist.
Mm-hmm. For sure. But they do get some kind of something back from it. They're a strange creature. Yeah, I guess, no matter how you look at it, it's just interesting in D&D and other RPGs, but we're talking about D&D here. Because, like, we're saying this in many videos and stuff, it's like gods are real things. Like, not to discount any real world people's faith, that, I'm not trying to, like, foist my own beliefs in you, but I mean, it's like, that's a part of the game. It's like, yeah, they're undeniably real. Like, there is divine beings, they have clerics, they, people do miracles, and they sometimes interact with the world explicitly. So, yeah, having temples, is pretty interesting. I'm curious, actually, in light of last week's news, in contrast to Theros, I'm curious what that will be like in the Dragonlance thing, because it does take place during the War of the Lance, as I understand it, that adventure, and like gods, people, they were not around.
Yeah, I was just poking around the Unearthed Arcana before we went live here, because
the Heroes of Krynn.
Yeah, they've revisited it, and are taking another look at some of the things that are in there.
Oh, cool. Oh, yeah, one of them is really, isn't it like a feat, really kind of like a divine magic initiative, or, one of those ones, like a magic-y feat.
Yeah, there's definitely one of those in there.
Which, I mean, although having said what I just said, like, part of the story is that, like, well, they're back now, so it's like, that's pretty exciting to play with in a campaign setting. Like, maybe you have quests to, like, because they're to go, find one of these old temples and, like, start it up again because you believe in this god. So you get that, like, ancient temple thing
again,
which is an awesome place for an adventure.
That's also kind of like the through line with the Dragonlance original story as well. The return of the gods.
Right. Yeah, so that's what I was saying. Like, that would be fun to play in that campaign, like, just narratively during that time, like, taking it for granted that, like, clerics and gods are part of D&D can be fun to kind of turn on its head, maybe, and just be like, well, not everybody's heard of these gods or would even believe that you can do these things. All of a sudden, healing word is, like the most miraculous thing anybody's ever seen, and ever.
It is one of the most broken spells I hear.
In that every bi-weekly game I play at Immortals Inc., who carries our out of the box book, Rocky River, Ohio. Go check it out. I play a cleric, and I only memorized healing word as a healing spell because I figured, like, well, it does less than cure wounds, but it's ranged and it heals people, so whatever. Yeah. And like one of the players was kind of like, seemed like incredulous because he was like, well, you got cure wounds. And I was like, nah, I only have healing word. And he's like, you don't have both? It's like, hey, man, it's like, you don't have nothing, dude. Like, I got, it's like, remember when I did those other cool things? That was because I didn't memorize healing word. It wasn't like, but that is my reasoning. What do you think? I mean, when you play clerics a lot, do you memorize both or one or none? I always think, like, well, healing word's good because it heals and it's at range, and there's a lot of other cool spells that I want to use too. So
I guess it depends on the cleric, like,
and the level too. I mean, if I'm like 30, it's like, look, I only got 2 spells I can take. I ain't taking both healing ones,
Yeah, it depends. Like, I might not be playing that kind of cleric, right? Like, if I'm playing a cleric of a war god and I take the war domain, there might not be any healing.
I think that would make sense. So even as it's like, well, if you're a warrior, it's like, what? Let's just break it down into brass tacks. What happens in war? You fight and hope you live. So it's like, if I can heal the guy next to me, he could just keep fighting, we're probably going to win this. Yeah, it doesn't get any more basic than that. It's just hit points and attrition.
But then again, like, maybe you believe some Viking shit and you're like, I want to go to heaven, so I have to die fighting.
Yeah.
So, but
I guess if you're that's interesting. If you're a cleric of war god, though, don't you want to lead? You want to guide others to that path. So if you die, there's nobody around to help them.
Well, I guess it really depends on what does being a cleric mean to that person and to that faith, right? Like, and also too, like, the idea that, and we've seen it in our own games where the player will choose to be a cleric, but their character never chose to be a cleric, right? Like they're just like the god chose them, be like, "You're my cleric now. Here's some cleric powers," and they're trying to like guide them, but they didn't really sign up for it. So like, they're probably not gonna. They may not be like, you know, fully invested in doing the things that you would expect the cleric of that god to do.
Yeah, that's a cool narrative for like a book, but I feel like in a D&D game, it's just like, well, if this really was a god and you were, if they were like, I think I'm going to test this person, or just like, they seem like they'd embody my things, and then you do like the opposite. I think it'd be like, yeah, I fucked up on that experiment. Bye. Like, you don't have any, like, why am I giving this guy powers? Like, he's actively working against me. My interest. Like, I don't like that. Sounds more warlocky. That's why they made the warlock for all those edgelords who want cool powers but don't want to acknowledge it. Like, no, you're supposed to worship a thing and have faith in this being.
I mean, maybe, but at the end of the day, like, can mortals really and fathom the whims of the gods and what the what they're looking at?
That sounds like you're just trying to talk your way around it.
Well, I mean, beings that have lived for thousands of years and also are immortal.
Here's what I'm saying though. It's like playing that and like leaning into it. I'm almost certain the player is just using that as a hook to not think about that more than they were like, I want to play this deep narrative arc where like it's this unfathomable being, and he's like, am I working for him? I don't know. Maybe it's like, well, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, but also you can start your character one way and have a character arc where they move towards that, right?
Right.
Like, because like Nate did that with his cleric in Ted's first campaign for 5e. And towards the end of the campaign, he started, he was more and more invested in that deity and what the deity wanted.
Right.
And I just look at it too as like it depends how you're using it and how you're playing in the game. Like if you're using these as excuses to be the anti-player, then yeah. But if it's narrative stuff that doesn't matter to anybody,
right? Sure.
Then it doesn't really matter. It's just a fun thing that you're doing.
Yeah. Chris says, "What about false gods or charlatans who found temples? Wasn't that plot of the king priest of Isser? I thought he was sort of like a steward who was like holding the plate. I'm not 100% sure that was my impression, but." When I saw this question, my first thought was of one of my favorite D&D sort of, inspirations, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser in Lankhmar. There's I think it's called like the Street of 1,000 Gods. And it's like, there's just tons of stalls and like, there's, like they just come and go. Sometimes it's like, well, that one didn't catch on this week, but like, it's also sort of, I mean, they're books, but I think they borrow that same sort of scenario where like, well, if people believe in it, sort of like Kuo-toa, and like how they even in the MCU talk about, it's like, well, if nobody believes in them, then they don't really have any power. But if they do, just like in the real world, if you don't get enough people to believe in it, they give you money and all sorts of stuff, even if you don't have any demonstrable effect of that belief.
Well, I think that was like
it was that a smooth way of
in Forgotten Realms. The time of troubles, like before the time of troubles, the gods were just the gods, and they had power and they were powerful. And then like the Uber god like cast them all out and be like, you can see what it's like to be mortal for a while. And also, when we undo all of this, you're going to have to actually accrue followers because you're going to have a vested interest in people believing in you because that's going to be how powerful you are. I believe that. I mean, it's been a long time since I read those books.
That was basic premise. Yeah, and then it was like with Cyric and all those. And there's like mortals and like they ascended to godhood right around the time the Immortals set came out. Oddly enough, so you could do that too.
Yeah,
for your portfolios and all that stuff.
So I personally, I love the idea of false prophets and charlatans starting temples. And you could even do a thing where it's like there's a community and like the elders are in on it, and it's been going
for
on
sure.
for generations, and they've just been like bilking the town.
A commoner with the magic initiate feat could go a long way in a you know what I mean, of just like like a little bit of illusion, maybe some prestidigitation, some hocus and some theatrics, and a bunch of people in on it too. Sure.
So yeah, there's tons of ways you can have fun with that. Also, too, like we've talked about in previous videos of the idea of sex within the church or the temple, and you see it in stories all the time that either are working towards what maybe they think is the truer path. Yeah, sex, not sex.
I was like, okay, we're going there. I was like, yeah, I guess in Conan the Barbarian they did that.
Yeah. But which these groups can be working towards
snake cults.
Snake cults. What they believe the truer path of the religion is, and it may be true or it may not be, right? Like, if especially if like the temple elders and high priests have kind of gotten corrupted and greedy and putting their worldly welfare and desires above the gods, then there might be a need for a change, or it could just be infiltrated by demons, whatever you want to do.
Yeah. So again, that's so many times that's what's fun about these chats for me is like, there's so many like layers to D&D in these games. It's like, maybe you just want to play like kick in the door style where it's like a temple's good, this one's bad, it's not really get into it and stuff. But then, what you're saying there is like, well, that's just layering on things that you just know about real life. It's just like, it's probably, there's like you were saying, like there is sects in different religions now. And it's like, why wouldn't there be in this too? They're still like sentient beings. They might have like, well, they interpret their beliefs this way and stuff. And then, like you said, there's that other layer where it's like, maybe they're not even humans. It's like there actually is magical creatures like fiends and aboleths and stuff, and they might seek to manipulate those people. And it's like that. That's how all of a sudden you got a pretty darn interesting D&D thread just from thinking about temples, right? Like the temple in your world, and this could be from a whole campaign from the beginning, or is that like dealing with divine forces, so like high level stuff. Sure. If you've been playing for a long time, there's probably at least one temple that's, players have visited more than once, right? So it's like, well, there you go. There's your in. It's just like, oh, there's something fishy going on there. There's some weird fringe element there or whatever. And it's like, next thing you got a pretty intricate investigation and, all sorts of stuff going in.
And in our original Griffin Gaff campaign, we basically had like the non-denomination church or temple.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Sure.
All a bunch of the gods have little shrines there that that either their own priests will maintain, or even like the person that maintains that church just respects them all equally.
I think to some extent, isn't Eberron sort of like that? They have like the sovereign host, where it's just like, it's a bunch of gods, but it's like it's just a host. We go there, and they have temples to just them. Like they don't even really get into the individuals of the like in the host. It's like that's what you worship, like the sovereign host. Or even the Game of Thrones, it's like the seven. It's like there's individual ones and whatever, but it's like when you go to the temple, it's like I'm just respecting them all because they're all gods. And
I think Eberron is both, right? It's like you can, like they do have the individuals and you can worship them, or there were priests that would just worship the pantheon as a whole, which was kind of interesting for D&D anyway when they first introduced that, because it really wasn't done that way before then that I remember. Right. Where you could just be a cleric of all the gods instead of picking one.
Yeah, and they had one of my favorite evil god pantheons, the Dark Six. I've used that in every 5e campaign and game I've ran since since and earlier. That's been around for a long time. Very metal. I just saw it. It's just cool for that same reason. It's like, it's just Dark Six. It's like in this world, people that worship dark powers might worship one of them more than the others, but it's like it's Dark Six. Like and they had cool names like the Devourer and stuff like that.
double underscore. Have you seen the Righteous Gemstones? I see it. I haven't seen it yet, but I see it keep coming up, and I just haven't got to it. It's on my list. That and our flag means death.
Yeah, I keep seeing that too, and it's like I would think I would like it. It was like Danny McBride's in it; he's really funny, and John Goodman. But yeah, totally. That's similar to what me and Ted were talking about with law enforcement last week. It's like, it'd be just as fun to play the people that work at a place in a D&D setting for all the reasons we've already said. It's like there can be fiends and other extraplanar forces and rituals gone awry and opportunities to use a lot of features and character features and spells that maybe you don't in a typical like dungeon crawling campaign, like we were talking last week about, like, if you're like a magical homicide detective, it's like maybe actually cast detect poison for once and try to figure out like what killed this person. I don't know. Or it's like, we found him with a stab wound and a puddle next to him. It's like maybe it was an ice knife. I don't know.
Well, so, like the idea of being players that kind of work at or for a temple could be interesting. I mean, because really in some ways it's even easier than the rogue game in the sense that like you all just have to be of kind of the same faith or employed by the temple. Like maybe you don't really care, but they pay you.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe you're just the janitor or like a temple guard. You're like, it's a good job. I mean, it's like temples don't get attacked too often. There's the healing benefits are great here.
But like you might have other things you have to deal with, like you said, infiltration of the church, or maybe there's a war nearby, and now refugees are flooding in. Yeah, and they're probably going to seek out places like temples to for help.
And again, like I just like these conversations always get me excited because I think like, well, there's all the ways that you incorporate those other pillars of D&D, or, I'm thinking like, okay, like in a typical, traditional D&D game, like, create food and water. It's like, sure, it kills like the exploration thing. It's like, well, it's bland, but everybody ate and we got water. But it's like, maybe you start actually thinking like, this isn't enough to feed all these people. Yeah. Like, what are we going to do? I mean, it's like, it feeds 40 people. We got 400 people here. You know what I mean? Like, and they're hurt. And, I mean, that would be fun, I think, for a different kind of story. It would still tax your resources in lots of ways, and they're probably you just turn that combat dial up and maybe like the other ones.
I mean, there could be places that have been kind of like sealed away at the temple that you discover for the first time. There's some kind of accident or explosion or earthquake, and like, oh, there's a whole nother wing of the temple we don't even know about. Why has this been sealed off for the last 100 years?
Yeah, I mean, you could do a whole campaign like, here's the premise, like an ancient temple of a forgotten god is discovered, there's a dig site or whatever, community grows up, and somebody's actually like practicing the faith and like convinces them like, well, yeah, I can, this is a real thing, I can help you, and you work there. And it's like a little community, and that can grow as the campaign does too, and flourish. Or
combining ideas.
Sure.
Your idea, but the person that shows up and like, this is a real thing, they actually have no idea about it. They're just making it up.
That's a great, yeah, for sure. Like, I'm kind of going, I had a plan to start, but I'm just going minute to minute.
They're just interpreting things and pretending they know.
Yeah, so totally. That's a great campaign premise because it's got like multiple places for tension, opportunity to adventure. And I mean, temples like dungeons and other things, it's also, relatively discreet location. It's enclosed. I mean, even if it's a humongous temple, it's like, well, I mean, at least they're not going to like, let's just go to the next town or whatever. It's like, you're in the temple. Like, that's if it's an adventure location. I guess I was thinking of that too.
Or make it one of the players that are like the ones that, like, you start feeding them the information so they think they know, and at some point you just inform them like, oh, you figured out you've been wrong all along. You don't actually know anything. What do you do? Everyone seems to believe you. You can keep going. Or
some of the worst villains in any of my campaigns were just like some like, unethical commoner, for lack of a better term, that lied to the players and they believed them. You know what I mean? Like, they've caused more trouble than monsters.
I thought you were going to tell me the players.
No. Well, I mean, inadvertently, by just not And I don't go out of my way to trick them, but it's just like, I mean, some people take advantage of that. I've said, like that one where it was like that mining situation. These people were just like, oh, these guys look like they're tougher than us, and just told them like, yeah, these people muscled in on our mine and just start digging and everything. And they were just like, oh, okay, we'll clear them out. And just like, that turns out they were just lying to you. I mean, those people had the deed and everything. They just were hoping to shut them down. You got the players to do it. I'm going to quest to kick the Thieves Guild.
Yeah, I was just reading some of the comments.
Well, yes, but at the same time, again, in the D&D world, there's like legit deities of thievery and stuff like that too. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you went to Catholic school, right? I'm not that well versed in the Bible, but wasn't that Jesus's thing? Like the ruling priests were all kind of corrupt.
No, I don't think so. He kicked the tax collector out of the temples, like the famous parable and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting location. Like we said, it's just evocative of so many things, and it does a lot of work for you by just being a temple. In D&D, there's perhaps the most famous temple in D&D anyway. I would say is the Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Been around as long as D&D, and I've adventured there in just about every iteration of D&D, including computer games and stuff. Over the years.
Is there a temple of the reptile god as well?
Yeah, yep. There's all the kind of forgotten temples and the lost temple of, I think isn't it the lost temple of Chanth?
Probably. I just know temple is featured in a lot of D&D adventures.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's the Temple of the Frog, I think, is a class. I'm picturing all the AD&D module things now. Temple of Elemental Evil. That's, like I said, that's just been one of my favorites because I just played it in so many different iterations, including like the Hamlet thing, and so it's got a lot of nostalgia factor for me. The Amber Temple and Curse of Strahd. Did you guys do that when you were playing in your Saturday morning group? I mean, I know you like everybody change up things in the adventure a lot, but did you go to that place?
We actually continue to go back to that place. It's part of the...
Really? Do you revisit it even now, like that your campaign has gone onto other...
Yeah, so...
oh, that's awesome, man. That's really cool.
So the twist was... what is it? Tatiana... what's her name?
Yeah, Tatiana.
I
mean, that is a character.
Is actually a vampire, and she's trying to usurp Strahd, and she's in league with the Dark Powers.
Oh, that's cool.
AKA Shadow Daddy. In order to destroy Strahd permanently, we are questing for the souls of his family. To bring them to peace so that he can be destroyed, so she can take over Barovia.
That's cool. Have any of the player characters made any deals with Dark Powers?
2 of us have received gifts.
Nice.
One has the Parasite. I think is it called the Parasite?
I think there is something like that, sort of like.
And then I am a Mistwalker.
What is that? Is that that class where it has all like the misty stuff and you can?
No, it's not a class. It's one of the. It's one of the gifts. I've never heard of that class.
What does it do? Does it give you some kind of like misty step?
It does give you misty step. Adds it to your spell list. Gets to cast it once a day, and then
awesome.
And then when you travel between the mists, you don't need a token.
Oh, nice. So you guys sort of like, it's like the Amber Temple's like your hub in a sense.
Yeah, and
that's pretty cool, man. Did that just sort of like come about? I mean, that wasn't the plan.
Nah, we did Curse of Strahd. We wanted to keep playing, and when it ended, so we did the train, the lightning rail, Seer 1313. We've done a kind of Lovecraftian Eldritch horror realm, and now we're in like this. Oh, I guess it's like what is that called? What is it? With the Red Death.
What is it? Another Domain of Dread?
It's a Domain of Dread, but it's one of the setting. I think it's based off of one of the old
Mask of Red Death.
I think so, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an old module which itself was based on Edgar Allan Poe story.
Well, there was a campaign setting.
Yeah. Man, I'm thinking like even in the actual like the Call of Cthulhu story ends in a temple, and that's sort of like we were saying earlier with like the scale and things, and and that takes place in like on our own Earth, so people aren't used to any kind of alien or different non-human creatures. So like at the end of that story, they find that huge temple that like is big enough for Cthulhu to walk through, and just like it's totally empty and there's nothing in it. Riz rose from the sea, and then he comes out and it ends on a. So, I don't want to spoil it for you, but it ends on a down note. That story, the Call of Cthulhu. But yeah, I mean that's and that'd be a great sort of premise for like an Aboleth adventure too. It's just like a temple that rises from the sea, so like again, like getting there is an adventure, or it just is right offshore, maybe it's just a temple that rises. I could see that in my own little homebrew setting with my little coastal village as a thing that happens, like just some temple rose from the sea out, not far from the shore.
I'm also kind of thinking back to when me and Ted did crime. And one of the things we talked about was gang wars. Like if you have a city with a bunch of temples that are kind of competing with each other, and what if they broke out into open warfare amongst each other? Something happens. They read the stars.
Oh, yeah.
The gods have decided what are the laws of man next to the laws of gods.
That's kind of like dovetails with Chris's comment about like the party represents a temple and they compete with other temples for followers. Like that could take a lot of forms, like proselytizing, pamphlets, maybe have like a donut luncheon and stuff, or pancakes with the priest, or whatever. But
or subtraction.
It's like but it could totally escalate into those things too. I think again, many times on these chats, the most fun thing to me is just like campaign ideas, because it's like, well, I'd like to imagine maybe somebody hearing this will go try that, or I'll in my own games. But that stuff sounds fun. I like strongly themed like adventures. That's why I like our Tuesday night group, because it's like we play 12 things. It's about this. We get to try some idea, and then try something else.
So in one of the last sessions I ran of Under the Dome, part of what they're doing is they're going out to scavenge raw crystals that they could then sell to get money and more grind, and everything powered by grind, all the Magitech stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the raw crystals happen when the rampant chaos magic that happens in the world strikes an area and changes it, and sometimes these crystals will be left behind, sometimes things will be turned into crystals. But the one thing is the one place that they were directed to is basically a giant purple worm that was petrified, and like it's got a maw full of teeth, but all the teeth are crystals, and its stinger is a crystal instead. So they're heading out there for a big score. The only problem is in that area, the Thri-Kreen worship the crystals, and they sing to the crystals sing to them, and the purple worm became Thri-Kreen Mecca, and they're like, well, I guess we're not going to get to that, and they end up having to leave it. So like it got me thinking, and what I've kind of set it up is like this is a holy site or a temple for the Thri-Kreen.
Yeah, right.
Now that they will may or may not deal with again in the future. Yeah,
that's a neat aspect that we hadn't talked about prior to that. It's just like a natural temple, like nobody built it. It's just it wasn't even meant to be that, but it's like you said, like a holy site, whether that's real or imagined. But that's pretty interesting aspect to it as well. And even when temples are built, it's often like maybe not in the city, but like it's not uncommon to like build it on a holy place or a special place. So that's pretty cool.
Some crazy dude had a dream. Now he's here with a hammer.
Yeah.
And some 2x4s.
Sure, right. I mean, they, even in, whether they're real or imagined or you believe in them or not, it's like they generally, at least, to like goodly, a temple dedicated to like virtuous things, at least would offer like solace generally, like even if you're a criminal, like, I mean, it's like, in the old West movies, somebody gets shot up and it's like they'll hold up at a church or even in like Daredevil and stuff or, modern day shows. It's like, well, I mean, they're sort of obliged to help people unless it's like a temple to like Asmodeus or something like that. Probably not.
Then maybe not as much.
Next thing you know, it's like, oh, hey, we got a new ritual sacrifice.
So now I'm kind of thinking about like some old dude. It's like in the middle of nowhere, players come upon him. He's got a burning bush or whatever. Pick your favorite religious iconography, and he's got a lean-to, and they're like, "What are you doing?" It's like building the temple, and they're like, "Whatever." They leave. Maybe they come back through another time, and now it's like his lean-to is a hut. You can just leave it there for and for years, have it in a place where they're going to go through, and it just like slowly gets built up.
That is pretty neat.
So eventually, like they're like, "Son of a bitch, he did it. We just thought he was crazy."
Maybe once in a while somebody will stop and help him or something. Just nail up one board.
Yeah.
And then you find out he's been building those little temples all over the region, and it's part of his serial killer ritual where there's his victims buried under.
And that's how he hides the bodies. He builds a temple over top of it. Takes about a decade per person, but
Yeah, every decade it hits. It could be like imagine. I mean, if you're an elf serial killer, it's like your timeline's way stretched out, man. Like, it might kill somebody every century or something like that.
Well, yeah, you get an itch, you scratch it, and then it's good for a while.
Build a temple. People get a kick out of it. That crazy guy building the temple.
Again.
Little do they know. That was I stole part of that plot from Dexter. That was spoiler alert, the Trinity Killer. He's like a pastor and stuff, and he goes around the country building like habitat for homes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Buries the victim in the cement foundation of it, so it's like they never found him and stuff.
And when he finally builds the final temple, it opens a portal.
Yeah, right. There you go. That's why he can take. He's actually worshiping Baal or something. It's like, yes, I must murder one person every 10 years and build a temple over their body, and then Baal is summoned. That's an awesome thing to. I love the idea of just going on in the background too, where it's like, players might be like, oh yeah, it's just a fun thing, especially if it was an elf. Maybe like in other campaigns, you're playing like this is fast forwarded, 20 years, and it's still that he's a little older or whatever. And then later on, it's just like, huge portal opens, connects like ley lines, flare to life, and connect all these temples. Giant god of murder emerges. That sounds pretty D&D. Rocking.
Pentagram forms a giant pentagram, and then
right, exactly.
As you do. But
so when they're flying in their flying carpet, they can see because they're high enough level. It's like you see across the land a giant pentagram of flame.
But in the meantime, like every time they go through, maybe they stop because he's like a good cook and he cooks for them, and maybe sometimes they can trade with him.
Mm-hmm. They admire him and like, this guy's really just he's hardworking.
He's dedicated.
I even helped him once. We stopped and helped him put up a wall and stuff. So you're even implicit in it.
Yeah. He's like, and they're like, ask, what God do you follow? Like, I don't know. I just had a dream and I follow my dream. Just leaves out the part part of the dream where he feels the urge to murder somebody.
Yeah.
And he needs to build the temple on top of their corpse.
Man, the things that D&D makes us laugh about.
Yeah, well,
they're just fictional people, but it's fun because then you're the heroes. You get to stop that guy.
You do get to stop that stuff. And also too, it's always cool when you can kind of like slow burn a big bad, right? Like, and get them attached, and then they feel really betrayed because they were tricked.
Yeah, or duped because they're like, why? Especially if somebody's like, something seems off about that, but everybody's like, it's fine, just come on, whatever. And you're like, that one player would be like, I knew it. The first time we saw him, I knew something was up with that guy.
I knew it was all wrong.
Yeah. I should have asked to do an insight check, and that's when you say, you don't ask to do checks, man. That's step 3. Just describe what you want to do.
But also they're just great locations for civilization, right? Like, if it's a small community, that's probably the hub of the community. Whereas if you're in a larger community, there's probably a bunch of them that you can choose from, and it's a great way for your players to kind of explore your world without getting info dumped on them. Like, you can put free depictions on the temples that they can kind of learn from that. They can learn through interacting with them. Most temples are going to have some kind of repository of knowledge and information that they can kind of go through, so they become resources that you can tap into, not just for healing.
And likewise, for that same reason, for the DM to sort of like, well, what is important to these people? It's like if you have like a frontier community and they got like, just like a priest of just even like a generic, like a goodly god or Palor or whatever. It's like, I mean, they, when somebody dies, they do funeral rites, or, like they'll, if somebody's sick, maybe they have, not just spells, but it's like they know about medicine, and they just sort of like guide us in our morals and stuff like that. We just look to them for guidance, basically. It's like, it's an important person, right? And like you said, it's like, well, usually, I mean, even in our own world, like, generally it's like, well, priests have some kind of education, so it's like, like they can read or whatever. It's like, maybe they're the only person that can read in town, so it's like, that's important, or whatever. I mean, it just tells you it's like, well, what is important to these people, is stuff that is handled by their priests or their temple.
Also too, like if it's a smaller community where there is only one temple or one church, it might inform you about the community itself too, right? Or you can just totally go like in his mouth with it, right? And be like, have it be creepy and weird vibes, and it's all stems from the church.
Yeah, sure. It's like, you can go to the surface, but it's like everybody has weird, watery, big eyes, and just it's off-putting,
to say the least.
Yeah. Again, like that meeting of stuff that's relatable from the real world, and then all the magic and fantasy shit is the fun for me. It's like there's a lot to be had there.
And also for the characters that are have a more religious bent, like maybe your clerics and your paladins, although I know paladins don't actually have anything to do with gods anymore, but I feel like many still go down that route anyway. Some people get really mad on like social media things when like people suggest that, like on our Facebook page or something. Made a meme about that. It's like, I know you don't have to, but you can. It's like maybe they just want their character to have some reference for the deities. I don't know. Some of us just like our paladins being champions of a said god. It's just how we like it. Yeah. But it could be a place for you to have religious debates within your game. Between different religions, and I've seen even in our one of our recent games where one of the characters was trying to convert someone from another religion to their religion, or they rolled really poorly and are like, I think I'm converting to their religion now, on a persuasion check. So it creates different dynamics within the game that we can explore.
That is really fun as a play. Like when I play, especially a cleric, but sometimes I play characters that like, if the setting or the DM like really seem to focus on they're like, they're like, oh, here's stuff about my world, and it's just like a pantheon. It's like, oh, okay, obviously that's important to them. So I might like pick like, well, which god would this character might be interesting? But it is fun to get into those sorts of things. And by that same token, I was thinking, as you're saying, like that can also be like, if you're a cleric or involved with the temple, they may need you, to do things like, so they can be a quest giver or, maybe not force it on you, but, I was thinking the other day, one of our Facebook discussions was about warlocks and how, it's sort of like a trope that like, oh yeah, when your patron wants you to do something, and, people like, oh, I love that about warlocks. So it's like, it's not like built into the mechanics. Like, if you, like, oh, you get your powers taken away if you don't do what the DM tells you to a certain time. But by that same token, I would argue like all the classes to some extent, it's like you can make an argument that like somebody might legitimately call on you, whether it's like an army because you were a soldier or a temple because you're a cleric, and just be like, hey, like you're a 10th level cleric of this god, like you're the highest ranking, temple official for miles and miles, like we need you, like, are you gonna maybe not have to, but it's like, well, it probably wouldn't look too good if you were just like, so I gotta go plunder this dungeon for treasure, sorry. Like, but we're your temple, like what, like you're representing our god.
You got the holy symbol, you got the powers.
You're just like, it's a test of your faith, good luck.
I don't know. That's a weird part of the game where I think like each group has got to kind of like figure out where they want to fall.
I just meant it depends on how you look at it. And I guess I didn't get to my point, which was like a temple could be a quest giver. Yeah. And like, yeah, I probably wouldn't tie it to where, somebody's like, millions of people are going to die and the world's going to end if you don't do what I say right now, basically, as a DM. I wouldn't do that, but it's certainly a interesting thing to have happen, maybe just one of those like out of the blue, or even just like you get a courier brings you a message or whatever. I like in this holy rap battle thing discussion going on in the chat here.
Parks.
Maybe you make some charisma religion checks or something like that, right? You play around with the skills.
Like flitting. What is it called? Is it flitting?
I don't know.
It's like Viking rap battles. Or they would have contests where I guess like insult contests. I know that Douglas, I think it was Douglas Cole we had on, was talking about that, and he like incorporated some of that stuff into the 5e products that he made.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's spelled fly-ting.
Okay.
And it's funny because I literally typed in Viking rap battles.
Oh, really? And it came up?
And it came up.
That's cool.
Yeah. But you could definitely do that. But like, instead of just like, you could just go, okay, you could have them do persuasion checks, but I think that's a little boring. I would make it into like a skill challenge and allow them to use different skills. Especially if you know what's coming up, and like flesh it out a little bit, using use the different skills and what the different checks mean. Especially if you wanted to have, for one, it'd be a lot more fun if like more of the party also took part in it as well.
Yeah, yeah, it could be fun. I mean, yeah, any kind of, you can make a whole session out of group, challenges. Like even it wasn't about a temple, but in when you guys ran Gartania, it was kind of like that. It was just like, there's a bunch of challenges, and so it's like there's just a lot of different ways to interact with those things for sure.
I kind of
and it's cool, that you mentioned that flighting or flitting, because it's like, it sounds silly, when you break it down, like, yeah, rap battle, but it's like, but people really did stuff like that. So there's some, it's like, it sounds silly and it probably would be a lot of fun, but you could also just play it seriously too, where it's like, yeah, this is a legit thing that people did. I mean,
yeah,
so like just takes it, maybe not that exact thing, but I guess just to add some legitimacy to you beyond it just being a silly thing that you made up for your game. It's like, no, people really did those things similar, so maybe if you sat and, we're just taking it like face value, but it's like, well, if you sat and like mold it for a bit, I'm sure you'd think of some pretty cool stuff,
Well, so the
sort
funny
of take
thing
on
is,
that.
right? Like the flitting, I was just looking it up. It's a
Sure.
ritual, poetic exchange of insults practiced mainly between the 5th and 16th centuries. Examples of flitting can be found throughout Scots, ancient, medieval, and modern Celtic, Old English, Middle English, and Norse literature involving both historical and mythological figures. So, like, I kind of want to make a whole festival like around this.
Yeah,
And
that'd be great.
where all the different religions kind of get involved, and it's like a contest, right? And
Yeah.
maybe with some kind of prize or whatever. Maybe part of it is like the prestige of winning. In a given city, maybe the faith that wins gets to be the city's faith for that year or whatever.
That's sort of like what the Lankmar is in that street. It's like the more bigger you get to move up the street to like a better time. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm loving this idea. Continue.
Yeah. So like there's so many different things you can do with it, and use it as the backdrop.
Yeah, that's really fun. I love how that's just little thing is kind of blossomed into like all those ideas you just came up with, because that sounds really fun. And like there's tons of different adventures that you like, maybe it's sort of like neutral ground, or at a temple like you have in Gryffindor, where it's like, yeah, but they're all represented there, but it's like, but there also is evil gods, so it's like maybe they would be up to like sabotage that or like break the rules of it being.
Yeah, like that could be like mini quests around it. Maybe there's a central location in the city that's like this, like Colosseum / temple.
Yeah, like you're saying. Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if it was like a tradition thing, there probably would be like a temple for that.
And then like you could literally there could be like, okay, well, maybe only the 10 big religions in the city get to participate. So maybe you have to deal with an uprising because all the other religions kind of band together and they're protesting the fact that they're not allowed to participate. And like there's so many like different things you could do with it. Yeah,
that's when that whole big group of all those people realize like, well, maybe if we all just believe in the same God, we'll manifest that. It's like,
and next thing you know, you have a giant octopus with a drift globe.
Yep, that's how it happens.
That's how it happens. So we are just past 9:00. We will be back tomorrow night, but we're going to be back on the main channel. We're launching a new video. We didn't launch a video today. It's going to go up tomorrow. At 6:45, 7:30, one of those. Come look at 7:30. I think it's 7:30. And it is about the new RPG we're launching, and we're going to be launching a live play of it. So we're going to be play testing a game we're creating, kind of live, Zoo Mafia. So you can come check that out. You can see the video. We're going to do it as a premiere, so we'll be hanging out in the chat, and then afterwards, I'm going to be running the first session of it. We're going to be doing 12 sessions of Zoo Mafia. Get to see Doug here and Steven and Robin and Nerdarchy Ted all try and become made members of a mafia within the zoo of Zoo Mafia. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And we'll be back here with Infinite Black on Friday afternoon at noon for just one of our live chats. So with that, until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.